Really excited for this webinar and to hear more about the work of the Southern Black Farmers Community-Led Fund. But before we dive into the session, I wanted to take just a moment to share a little bit about the participatory grant-making community of practice. So I have some slides I'm going to share. Okay, so the participatory grant-making community is a global collective of individuals and organizations who are sharing knowledge and practice to improve participatory grant making and also to encourage its use within philanthropy. So we believe that philanthropy should be community-led, and we work to support individuals and organizations and movements who are trying to shift power in philanthropy. And our values that we operate out of are self-determination. We're rooted in values of anti-oppression and equity. We value accountability and transparency, and we move with care, love, and joy. And you can read more about our values and just more about us on our website, which is participatoryggrantmaking.org. Lots of valuable information there. Yeah, so we started in 2020 with a group of participatory grant makers who wanted to just do peer support and learn from each other. We've been hosting monthly peer support sessions, and we also do deep dive webinars like this one, where we look at a topic more thoroughly. We have a Slack and a Google listserv where people can share questions and what they're learning and what they're seeing in the field. And now we have over 1,400 people from 73 countries. We've started to do some in-person gatherings. We also have a buddy system where we peer practitioners together so they can learn from each other. And we also created a participatory governance model. So we have an accountability circle of participatory funders who are guiding our work. So yeah, if you're excited to be a participatory grant-making nerd, you should join us and follow along. You can go on our website to get on the Slack and the Google group. You can follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. You can also donate. We're mostly volunteer run, but we do have one staff person who helps out. And you can email us if you have questions, and we love to hear from you. So one of the fun things about our community is that we get to highlight and learn from some of the amazing participatory work that's happening. And in my opinion, this fund is one of the coolest funds doing this work. So I'm really excited to introduce you to them. So we have Kolu Zigby, who is the fund facilitator. He'll be joining us today. Hi, Kolu. We have Terrence Courtney, who's from the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, and he's a fund co-chair. And we have Elsie Parks, who's from SAFON, the Southeastern African American Farmers Organic Network, who is also a fund co-chair. So, hi everyone. Kolu, why don't I turn it over to you to give a little bit of an overview of the history of the fund and how it got started.
The story of the fund really kind of coincides with the twin systemic problems that we, really came face to face with starting in 2020 with both COVID and then the police murder of George Floyd in May of 2020 that led to this summer of racial reckoning where people all over the world were protesting in the street, and the issue of the persistence of anti-Black racism and systemic racism was on a lot, I don't know about everybody, but it felt like it was on everybody's minds, and organizations were trying to grapple with how to deal. And our founding donor felt called to rethink their philanthropic practice, to more explicitly address systemic racism. And they realized that that meant upending the power imbalance that is generally inherent in philanthropy, where those with wealth or those who are governing the wealth call the shots, and everybody else competes for attention and for the opportunity to get some of that money. And so the donor decided to relinquish control over the grant decision-making process, and in some ways, even in the design of the strategies, and to people directly affected by anti-Black racism. And they had already been funding in the food and agriculture space. So it made sense that would be the arena for their investment. And they turned to advisors at RSF Social Finance to help devise sort of the process, how they could make this happen. And RSF invited me to help design the initiative because of my 20-year background in funding farmer-led organizing and advocacy in the United States. And we focused on the South, where there's the largest concentration of Black farmers in America, and also high levels of poverty because of the historic and ongoing extraction of wealth from Black communities by a political and financial system, power structure that actively enacts laws and policies to disenfranchise Black communities. And we realized that within the context of anti-Black systemic racism, Black people have a very powerful history of organizing to support their families and communities, including overcoming barriers that limit access to financing, access to land, equipment, markets, and information, so that they can work together to build businesses, institutions, mutual aid networks. So even though we saw the disenfranchisement, we also recognize that anchored by Black farmers, the food and agriculture economy is a very rich field for community wealth building, collective decision-making, and creativity. And that significant infrastructure for a Southern economy of food and fiber and plant medicines exists in the form of organizations that have been on the ground for decades, cooperatives, and incredible leaders. And we wanted to model a restorative philanthropy that ceded control over investments to those leaders. So our donor loved the idea of centering and supporting the collective leadership of organizations that had been working in that region. And basically, I just made phone calls to people that I had known over my 20 years, worked with, sent out formal letters. And the result was that 6 organizations agreed to serve as anchors for this funds. So they include state-level organizations, the Alabama State Association of Cooperatives and the Mississippi Association of Cooperatives, and organizations working at the regional level, like the Southeastern African American Farmers Organic Network, the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, and the Southern Rural Black Women's Initiative. And then we also have a national coalition which includes many members, actually a concentration of members in the Southeast, and that is the National Black Food and Justice Alliance. So our first meeting, I'm gonna wrap up soon, I know I've been talking a while, but just wanna say that we started with our very first meeting in December of 2020. And at that time, we imagined that the whole cycle of grant making would be complete after 9 meetings, and that at most we would exist as a 3-year initiative. So on June 20th, we have monthly meetings. Each of the organizations that I named is represented by 2, in some cases 3 people, so that there's always somebody who's able to attend the meetings. If somebody has a conflict or is out sick, one of the reps can attend the meetings. But we went from imagining a relatively short-lived excuse me, engagement to now this month, we're going to have our 40th meeting. So it has been an incredible experience. I think none of us realized how generative it would be. And I will share that at the top of our meetings, we always spend at least 20 minutes just checking in with everybody, hearing about them personally and also organizationally. And that kind of sets us off with having done that for such a long time, not only with a foundation of trust building, because we really have gotten to know one another, but also for a deep understanding of each other's work. And that has been really, really powerful and important to our process. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. So many bits of wisdom in there. I already heard like flexibility on timing expectations. So, but we're gonna show a quick video, and I think this is like the premiere of the video, if I understand it correctly, about this fund. So, Yelena, yeah, if you want to put that on now. Thank you.
I do this work because I feel I'm called to do it. I feel that it's my duty to be supporting Black farmers and ensure that they have everything that they need to live and be well and also be whole. So many things have happened to Black farmers that are not right by any means, and I feel that it's in my power to make something different and build an alternative. Nature provides for us and is deeply a part of our cultural inheritance.
I come from a lineage of farmers, of land workers, of herbalists, and have been one generation disconnected, and I'm returning, realizing what support is needed, especially for young farmers who are in the South, coming from the South, have stayed in the South. I just want to be a part of developing different ways to engage with young folks. So they are looking for land, trying to find ways to build up their business.
I'm passionate about building people power. I myself am not a farmer. I started my career off as an organizer, both union and community cooperatives, something very essential. It brings people together in a structure, helps them become more organized.
I care so much about our community, and especially about our ability to have self-determination. With everything that's going on in the world, Black America, and especially Blacks in rural America, have got to decide for themselves how they're going to figure out their own economic opportunity for their children and families.
The Southern Black Farmers Community-Led Fund. The participatory grant-making fund, led by leaders accountable to Black farmers and rural communities. Decisions about funding are made by a diverse advisory committee already working on the ground, who understand the challenges and opportunities facing our communities. We lead some of the most respected nonprofit organizations working with farmers and rural communities in the South. The Southern Black Farmers Community-Led Fund has focused on Mississippi and Alabama, which are historic and ongoing sites of Black oppression rooted in America's early agricultural economy. That economy contributed to the wealth of the nation, yet our region receives a disproportionately low percentage of philanthropic investment. The legacy of Black oppression is visible in the political and economic disenfranchisement of rural Black communities, our lack of access to full-service grocery stores, accelerating land loss faced by our farmers, and out-migration of our children from rural to urban areas. We know that this grim reality is not the end of the Southern Black story, which has a rich and deep tradition of local leadership, community organizing, and grassroots institution building. Unlike foundations, who typically pit us against one another, we, the fund stewards, has created a culture where we share our knowledge and strategies and develop innovative collaborations and partnerships.
I was excited to recognize the expertise of organizations that have been doing work on the ground, in some cases for many decades. They are our experts. We have a living landscape analysis. Those members bring to the table what they see as the challenges, the opportunities, strategies, and solutions, and then collaboratively, they're prioritizing grants to make the decisions about where money should go.
Most times that philanthropic process has been very high level and not really knowing who they're funding or knowing the work of the funds or just like the impact that it will make on the community. And this process has just been so different. We're building relationships, we're enhancing the relationships that we've already built. The funds that we're participating in are helping the people do what they're already doing, just making more impact.
There's a real opportunity in trusting our people to have strategies and solutions that they implement themselves, and all they need is consistent investment and resources to be able to continue to steward and develop their work.
This process focuses on local people that have already made the step in their local areas and their local communities to make economic opportunity for themselves.
When we get together, it's not just about looking at who to fund, but it's strategizing about what the problems are and collaborating on solutions. So it becomes a generative space.
You need to have other people with other ideas in order to help you to grow. Because this day and age, you limit yourself when you only deal with people with the same philosophy that you have. You have to broaden your horizons.
When you really sit down and have conversation, what you learn from those groups can help you with your group and what you're trying to do in your community.
There's a lot of expertise in the South, community building, the establishment of cooperatives, localized economies that could support Black communities and Black families. That knowledge of how to build your own supply chains, grow your own food is really critical. I think has a value to everybody in this country.
Everyone needs to eat, and in times of crisis, folks are always looking to farmers. We don't often talk about the people who tend to the land and cultivate the crops and make food possible. We have an opportunity to really center farmers and invest in farmers to right some of those wrongs.
The South is filled with Black farmers. Farmers are agriculture geniuses and are able to grow, literally making something out of nothing. But then once it's time to harvest, that's where the issues come in. We don't have the infrastructure that we need, like cooling, distribution, or processing centers. And those things would be vital to creating some sustainable food systems infrastructures.
Big things that are needed down here, thinking of like young and returning farmers, business support, land acquisition, just connecting folks to people who've already been doing it, like elder farmers.
The farmer is a human being. We have to have things in place in the community that will relieve the stress on them. Good housing, medical care, good schools for their children, financial institutes that don't make it so hard and difficult for them when they need to have some kind of financial help.
Groups like this, which are community-led, make a difference because we really are on the front lines of these problems and know what's happening, and we know where the resources need to go.
The Southern Black Farmers Community-Led Fund has made several $1 million in investments based on our key funding strategies, including those related to food and community infrastructure, such as storage sheds, commercial kitchens, and cooperative grocery stores. Initiatives to connect established farmers with aspiring and new farmers to ensure the continuation of their legacy into the next generation. Training and certification to expand farmers' access to market and the use of regenerative agriculture to build resilience in the face of climate change. And innovative financing for farmers facing barriers to affordable capital. To make a contribution or to learn more, please visit our website. Thank you.
Awesome. Such a great video. I'm glad we could share that. And yeah, I'd love to ask a few questions of the co-chairs who are here with us. So Terrence and Alcy, I'd love to hear how this fund has worked for you and what it's made possible in your communities and in your work.
I guess I'll go first. Well, I think one thing I really appreciate about that video is that it really summed up the conversation I think we're having right now. And I want to connect that to some of the values that I heard expressed by your group here. One of those values I think that really kind of shines when we think about the work we're doing and what this is all meant to us. And where we're going is this idea around self-determination. I think that's really at the center of what's going on, where that's the difference in our participatory process, where it is truly a self-determinative process. It's one that is not community-based in name, but actually in practice. This is something where I think we've actually taken what has been theorized and put it into real practice. And at the center of that is what people have talked about, where we represent, myself, Alcy, and others at the table represent people and organizations that are really on the front lines, as it was said, people who are facing the most challenges economically, socially, in any number of ways that you can think of. And by putting those people at the center, what happens is the needs are more directly expressed and they can be more directly handled. And another thing I appreciate about this process that we've been able to have for more than 3 years now is I think it's really strengthened the networks and the relationships between the organizations at the table. Beforehand, I think we knew of each other and worked together intermittently, but this process has, I think, strengthened that and made it more dynamic. And I think in essence, we're also not just kind of meeting these needs, not just kind of creating a self-determinative process, but I think we're building, some solid movement infrastructure for that change that people talk about in the future.
Thanks for sharing, Terrence. Grateful to be here. Hi, everyone. What this fund has made possible to what Terrence shared is like some of these organizations, I would say like even just a couple of them who are babies, like infants in the work, have been around for 17 years. Organizations like the Federation of Southern Cooperatives has been around for over 55 years. And so, the who's at the table, I think, made up of these like respected organizations that have built Black Southern agrarian grassroots institutions and who hold their farmers, their bases with so much integrity. Just grateful to COLU for, recognizing the impact of having us be able to collaborate together and direct some of those direct resources. I think another thing that this fund and this process have made possible is, being able to be more precise with how resources are directed, because of the work that we do in the field. And because of the intimacy of the relationships and understanding that we have with our farmers and the communities that they're a part of, we clearly understand what the needs are. And that precision allows us to deliver resources more efficiently, faster. I would say too, just in my very short period of moving through like philanthropic circles or just like interacting with funders or doing grant making inside or asking for grants, like asking for resources, being grassroots institutions that, less capacity has to go into making the case or convincing someone who's not on the ground, like what is worthy of being resourced. This is one of the first spaces that I've been able to be in where I'm not having to kind of like advocate just as a baseline understanding around like, hey, this is why we need this. Just like very grateful that the folks that are at the table, we're not having to convince and we're actually able to get into like real conversations and strategy about like, hey, these are the solutions that people have been practicing for decades. These are, current conditions. How are we meeting those current conditions? How are we adapting together? How are we interdependent inside of our landscape so that each of the unique offerings at our organizations, and the networks of organizations and people that we hold, are able to like really dig in and have the financial resources to be able to concentrate on some of the things that like not everybody's trying to pay for. Not everybody's trying to pay for people capacity. Not everyone's trying to pay for people, like for groups to be in process and convening and in fellowship with one another. And so, yeah, I think that like, I appreciated Kolu naming, like, I thought we were just gonna start with 12 meetings and now we're at meeting number 40. Because, you know, we're moving at the pace of trust, we're moving at the pace of ideation, cultivation. You know, this has been long-term, like visionary work. And to actually be able to have the time and the patience that processes deserve has been, I think, really beautiful and beneficial. I'm very grateful.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing all of that. I'm already taking notes on all the bits of wisdom shared. But yeah, this is, I think, a room full of participatory grant making nerds. So we're going to get into the details here a little bit. And I saw some great questions in the chat. We are going to talk about process, decision-making process. So yeah, maybe just one of the things I loved about the video was the like strategic goals. And so I'd love to hear you share a little bit about like how you got the group to get to values alignment.
Well,
Go for it, Terrence.
no, I'm sorry. Was someone else going to speak? Go ahead.
Well, Terrence, I'll let you kind of get into, because I think Kelly might also have a question about like the kind of like nitty-gritty of the process, but I can take a stab at this strategic values alignment. So with the organizations coming from this shared landscape, which is like Black agrarian agricultural communities in the South, you know, I think we already kind of had a common North Star. And so being able to kind of like deepen our understanding of like approaches, like what are y'all strategies, like what are the programmings that you all are experimenting with. We spend a lot of time just like storytelling. I think because so much of our work is so intensive, even inside of our own institutions, like being able to be in collaborative spaces and sharing in conversation and being like, oh, I didn't know that y'all had this program. You know, like that's something that is similar or complementary, or, you know, like I'm just being able to know what each other's sweet spots are. But I think that kind of commonality inside of, you know, identity, culture, those are things that foundationally all of the institutions and the leaders inside of the institutions already had. I think another thing that supported us with getting into values alignment was like folks have been involved in generational struggle. I think that we're not creating anything new. We're not creating anything that, you know, folks haven't been kind of like whittling away at, like issue, solution, you know, like being inside of this iterative process. Certainly not just in our generation, certainly, you know, by our ancestors, our elders, and prayerfully our descendants, I think has really been able to support us in like, you know, not having a whole lot of disagreement about like where we're going. We inhabit the same universe, the same social spaces, we're occupying, you know, similar shared experiences. And so we can more readily come to some agreements. And yeah, our similarities far outweigh our differences, organization to organization, and how we hold and center our farmers. And I think taking that time, like I said, to like build trust on the front end, like we eat together, you know, we prioritize being able to have strategy spaces on farms and land bases that are within our networks. There's time for like play, and not, you know, we certainly have full agendas and lots of ideas and dreams and things that we want to concretize. But I think that like ability to slow down, to be deliberate and intentional about like getting to know each other and each other's work and the bodies of work that our institutions are holding, made coming to values alignment more easeful. Like take the time.
Wow. That totally makes sense.
So yeah, I agree with Elsie, and what I guess what I'd add to that was everything she said was absolutely true. It's one of the strengths of the process, and one of the things, as she said, that helped us achieve alignment was, you know, occupying the same social and historical spaces. But at the same time, I also want to make sure that we express that it wasn't necessarily a slam dunk. There was a dialogue that had to be had because, you know, we occupy the same space, but our organizations have different roles within that, right? So, you know, in terms of our values, I guess you could say there was kind of a broad level of agreement. But then when it came to applying those values to conversations about what kinds of projects we should fund, or, you know, what are some of the strategies we should be supporting, you know, we arrived at that through consensus, but that consensus wasn't like, you know, a hop, skip, and a jump. We had some really good, tough conversations. I mean, and I think Elsie mentioned the trust that we've been able to build. One of the greatest things about that is that it enables us to disagree with one another without fragmentation, without kind of a dissolution of the group. That trust, for example, enabled us to think about how we would fund each other, not just from the traditional, you know, point of view where, well, is this going to, I guess to use a corporate term, it's going to yield a return next year? Is this something that's very tried and true? Well, that trust factor we came through and created enabled us to struggle over questions around, let's start to think about supporting more experimental forms of organizing in the South. And I think that trust enabled us to, you know, really start to think about more cutting edge approaches to creating the world we want to see. So I agree that that alignment was, you know, more or less there because of the social and economic and historical spaces we occupy, but it still required dialogue. But that dialogue was rooted in trust, and that enabled us to get through sometimes what might be for other groups difficult moments.
I love that so much. I think so much we can try to pass over the hard stuff instead of sitting with it and learning together. So yeah, the next question I have is kind of like digging in a little deeper to like the actual process that you use to make grant decisions. And I'll just share for the like super nerds on here that in the participatory grant making world, this fund was set up as a closed collective, which is basically where organizations like come together and make grants to each other, but also to others outside of the group if they'd like. And so, yeah, I'd just love to hear like how, like, what is the process you use to make those grant decisions together?
So I think I'll take a stab at it, and please chime in, Elsie and Colin. But you know, when we were thinking about this question a few days ago, you know, we realized that, you know, our process it is quite deep, and if we broke down all of the parts, you know, we kind of came up with like a 12-step process, but we thought Well, you know, that probably wouldn't be helpful for you to go through 12 of those steps. So what I want to do is thank Kolu for helping us to kind of condense and summarize some of these. So I don't know if we can share the screen if possible, but you know, step one is, I think we've talked about a lot thus far, is that grounding that we have that enabled us to kind of have deep discourses about our values and reviewing our commitment to the process and learning from the previous work that we've been doing over and over again. So that trust that we talked about helped ground our decision making. And I like to think what's cutting edge, and I haven't been in many spaces like this, is, you know, we were engaging in trust-based philanthropy. We weren't doing this work of trying to find reasons why not or what's wrong with this proposal. We were really looking for examples of work that would help us do something sometimes cutting edge, as I said before, to help us overcome this, quite frankly, this struggle we're in. I mean, Black farmers and Black institutions and rural communities are involved in a real struggle over the economic conditions we face, the social conditions, and they still perpetuate themselves. So that trust-based grounding we have, I think, is essential to participatory grant making. Next is the analysis. As I said, you know, this wasn't just, you know, an act of us coming together and scratching one another's back and kumbaya and all of that. I mean, there were tough conversations where we wanted analysis. Our process included people having to provide proposals, and we went through those and we engaged in critical debate about these. It was loving, it was trust-based, but sometimes, you know, you were asked some hard questions. So, you know, we were looking in this analysis for where are the gaps in the work that we're doing? What are some of the opportunities to collaborate with others and take risks to catalyze this work and identify potential grantees and potential projects that we can work with in the future? I think next we have deliberation, where, you know, we took those conversations and we didn't just simply have a one-off. We came back and as people, if sometimes where, you know, we needed more information, or if we thought that some questions about this proposal were unanswered, we came back and again, we had a very dialogue-based, trust-based, and I think loving approach to this, where not every project proposed got funded. What was great about our process, I think, was even those who put forward a proposal, upon our conversations and dialogues and analysis, said, no, let me withdraw that. I think now's not the time for this one. So I think that process has an internal accountability factor to it. And then finally, number 4, you know, we made the decisions to administer these resources. So, you know, we went through, as I talked about, the application process and conversations about how the resources will be distributed to ensure fiscal statuses and banking. And we made sure to highlight the work on our website to let others know that, you know, we are a place where, you know, serious-minded people who are engaged in rural-based work, engaged with Black farmers, Black cooperatives, where they realize that, you know, now's an opportunity to work with us and maybe move the needle in a positive direction. That's just kind of my summary. I don't know if Kolu or Elsie has, you know, more to add to what I said.
You did great.
I think we may have already mentioned that we do use a consensus process. And if it's something very complicated or thorny where we can see there's maybe differences of opinion, I think we've at times used the fist of 5, but we generally don't need to do that. You know, it's like any, we make sure that there's adequate, as you've heard, adequate time for discussion and questions. And then it's, any objections. And if there's no objections, then we move forward.
Yeah, I have to also give this group credit for that. This group has been some of the best practitioners of consensus. We have some very nimble facilitators in our group.
The only thing that I wanted to add too is like, I've seen RFPs that are 44 pages. And so it was really nice to not only be inside of like a participatory grant making process, but like a relational kind of like resourcing strategy. And so being able to have the groups make proposals about the folks that they represent, the partner organizations that they're working with, our application process is a Google form, right? It's like, hey, we just need to know, like, get a good sense of what you're trying to do. And then having folks who know what that work looks like on the ground and the intricacies of that, being able to kind of like, that part of deliberation is like, well, I know it's not like we want the application to be simplified, but I got some questions. It's like, I got some answers because these are my people. And so I just wanted to add that too.
Awesome. Yeah, so I mean, something that came up for me just as you were sharing was the question around like how this has been different from traditional philanthropy. And also like related to that, like how do you respond to questions about conflicts of interest that I imagine come from traditional philanthropy who aren't used to this like relational decision-making process?
So maybe I'll start us off on this one. So most essentially, we're not competing. There's not a sense of competing against one another, right? It's really about collaboration. So sometimes, I think almost always when we do sort of flow funding anchor organization grants, but on top of that, we fund partners, but we also fund our own collaborations. And so that's where we see mutual benefit. It's like mutual movement interest, right? We're all in this together. And so we see a gap and it's like, which organizations are best situated to work on filling that gap? And we talk about how it benefits all the organizations and the broader field. So I think being non-competitive, reducing the competition, I think traditional philanthropy really tends to pit organizations against one another.
I'd like to add too, I've had funders like for my organization be like, well, don't y'all do the same thing as this other organization? And that kind of like idea that the need isn't so grand that like, actually we need them to be doing what they're doing too. And I think it also helps us navigate, at least as, I feel very new in like this kind of like philanthropic space, is like, you don't have to be a movement darling, right? Like there's a way in which like being a hyper visible institution means that like it seems to be less risky for other philanthropic entities to be like, well, we've seen them and we know that they've funded them. And so let's fund them and fund them and fund them and fund them. But like it invisibilizes the constellation of other institutions and organizations that might not have the same muscle or capacity around comms or who aren't hyper visible, but are doing like beautiful, quality, important work. And I think that relational piece helps us to visibilize some of the connective tissue and some of the institutions and organizations and collectives of people that I think probably fly under the radar when, they're not hyper visible.
Hmm. When I think about that question, I really feel like conflict of interest is a false frame for our process. Because I think what I heard Elsie saying that I agree with is what actually is taking place is our interests become mutualized. Our interests become decentered and collectivized, right? So I'm interested in seeing the work of Saffron grow and prosper. Same thing with other people at the table. So when we make decisions to resource ourselves and groups that we work with, it's really kind of collectivizing interests, not in what I heard Cole say, pitting us against one another in a competitive relationship. And I think when you think of conflicts of interest, I think what they speak to are exploitative relationships. That's not what's taking place here, because again, of the social space our organizations and institutions occupy, our historical roles, the roles that we're playing together, and what I'm arguing is this movement infrastructure we're perhaps organically or in some ways subtly creating by working together over such long periods of time, supporting one another, supporting emerging organizations, sort of, I think, rather than a conflict of interest. And I like to frame it as an expansion of interest.
Yes, I want to say something too. That's beautifully said. I'm so glad this is being recorded. Thank you, Terrence. Another thing that I think differentiates what I've seen from philanthropy is generally, under-resourced communities and organizations tend to get the smallest grants. There's this concern around, like, oh, the bigger, you don't have the absorptive capacity. We don't have that hang up. We understand that the communities that have been under-resourced historically have the greatest need, and we make decent sized grants. We don't make, we make some small, we make them according to the need. So we've made, I think the lowest may have been $15,000 grants, and our largest grant was $700,000. We've made plenty $100,000 grants. We're investing in infrastructure. We're investing in full salaries with benefits, not partial salaries. And so I think that's another difference. I've seen, I've been in I was a funder for 20 years. And so I know that there's a tendency to think that, oh, these, grassroots organizations, they can do a lot with a little, and we can, but that's not the way to make systemic change, and so we I think are more realistic. Maybe I should say here, because I saw a question in the chat about how much money we've given away, and yeah, it's been close to $3 million. And we are planning to do really only our second round, which will be another approximately $3 million. And we're also in the process of trying to raise another, 3 million plus, because our goal is to raise another $5 million, of which we already have in hand 3 million. So we actually want to invest another $5 million between this year and next year.
Yeah, and another question I saw in the chat that I thought you might like to share about is what is the role of the donor in this structure?
Our donor is really in the background. They don't come to our meetings. I wouldn't say that they're actually anonymous, but they're very low profile. So we don't really, we choose not to call them out. They have, like I said in the intro, they've ceded power not only about the grant decisions, but about our process. And I talk to them on occasion, not very frequently, but I do, we speak on occasion. And I will say that one of the things they shared was the relief that they feel not being burdened by having to make the calls around where to invest, and knowing that the people making those decisions are on the front lines and actually intimately knowledgeable about the work.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and there's so many good questions coming in. I wish we had time for all of them. I know we only have about 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna pick one that I think is really interesting, which is the question of like what learning or understanding had to happen or had to be in place in order to do this work.
That's a tough, that's a tough one, because it's almost like, you know, it sounds very repetitive, but we grew up in this. You know, this is our home. This is where we're from. This is this is our experience that we're talking about. So it's not something that I don't think anybody at this table learned from reading per se in order to do. I mean, obviously there's some extremely strong minds at the table. So these are people who understand the work both from an analytic and theoretical perspective, but perhaps more importantly, it's a lived struggle. So I guess I would answer that question, like this. It's partly you have to kind of, if you want to support this kind of work, I guess that's where I'm going, is you really have to study that self-determination part of your values and really think about what that means to you. Think about what community-based and community-led really means to you. Think about what change, because when I thought of an answer about the donor, I think a change took place in that donor's consciousness, where they actually started playing their position, being a donor, and that's it. Oftentimes, the donors want to be more than donors. They want to lead movements subtly or unconsciously, perhaps. But I think this donor thus far has been one that has lived that trust-based philanthropy we described.
Yes, I'll go after you, Elsie.
Thank you, Kolu. I appreciate that. I think it's Christy that said, or unlearning. I think like one of the fascinating things inside of this space, I've been doing this work for 10 years, 12 years, but it's like $3 million to start, it's like, wow, it's so much money. And it's actually like a drop in the bucket when you really like look at the scale and the scope of the need and the kind of like infrastructure, capital investments that need to happen. And so one of the unlearnings that I watch, not just for myself, but like within the group, is like how we think about money, right? It's like, oh, like as Kolu said, grassroots institutions can like make a buck stretch, right? Because of our like creativity, our ingenuity, and our innovation. But it's like what we think we can do with 25K, what can we do with 250K? And just like for me having to be like, that's small money. Like we've got big dreams, big visions, and we see what needs to happen. And we need big money for that. And one of the other things that I saw inside of the space was like, how are we shifting the paradigm from like scarcity to abundance? Because I think, for Saffon, unrestricted operating funds are like relatively new. I don't know if this is like a progressive philanthropy thing, but like so much of the work used to just be like, what's the project? What's the deliverable? What's the thing that's going to come from this investment? And shifting into like, well, no, our people deserve to be resourced. And there's like more resources. Like, I think that even when we were like inside of decision making, like, well, that's a big grant. And I'm like, spend it, like it'll come back to us because the work that we're doing is spiritually grounded and has like some deep impacts. And so it's been nice to watch us reorient ourselves around like letting the money flow, get it in, get it out, because we will just be able to continue to build up our pot of resources, because we can materially, tangibly show that it is impacting not just individual people, not just collectives of peoples, but whole communities.
Well, I know we're at time, and I wanted to thank you all so much for sharing your time with us today. And I'm just such a huge fan of this work, and I can't wait to follow along with everything you're doing. And I'd love to just give you each a chance, if you have anything else you want to share before we close, to share.
Thank you. Grateful for the conversation. I hope it was helpful for people joining. I'd love to see a lot more of this take place. I think this is one of the most positive experiences I've had with grant makers and finding resources. It's usually very challenging, but I think this process to me is a very good model for how to do it in the future.
Okay, I'll just say that I know the web link that I shared isn't up yet. Just got a message from one of our supporters that it should be live by Monday. So you can keep in touch with us that way. And I should have put my contact, my email or something in the chat. Maybe I'll do that right now. But thank you all for joining us. Elsie?
Yeah, no, I'm very grateful that we've had space to share, and just grateful to Kolu for seeing us and believing in us for years and years, and knowing the right people to bring into deeper collaboration with each other, and Kelly and the participatory grant making nerds, like just creating a space for folks to share and be in exchange and create more resources that are just like impactful. So yeah, just gratitude to everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, we'll be recording this and putting it on our YouTube. And yeah, reach out to Kolu or reach out to us if you have any questions. And yeah, thanks again. Have a good rest of your day or evening, wherever you are in the world.